I'm Seamless, and this is part 2 of recording drums in FL Studio that I have done, and in the middle of doing. Um, the previous video was all about the physical sort of aspects of actually miking a drum kit, the way that I have decided to do it, and why I have, and all this sort of stuff like that. I also talked about my setup and like the sort of point of various things that we're doing, and now I'm going to show you actually like how to actually record inside FL Studio, and then how I mixed this particular sound. And just for kicks, this is what that sounds like without any of the actual mixing engaged, except for the final sort of compression to make it loud. So, recording in FL is pretty straightforward. It's more or less the same process as any other at all. It's just the arming and the inputs or whatever are just arranged to fit the UI of FL, as you would expect. So, how does this work? So the way that I do this is that in the previous video I mentioned I have 2 PreSonus Fire Studio projects. That's 16 inputs in total. I'm using 10 of them. And the way that I have this arranged is I'm doing 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and 5, 5. And the way this shows up is if you go into any of these mixer inserts, including the master, you have this input panel. Provided you go into here and you have the actual driver selected of your device, ASIO will work for drivers. It'll for the Fire Studio anyway. I mean, I've done it; it works fine. And then you can go. And I'm still kind of quiet. It's too loud. How's this? That's better, I guess. Whatever. You can still hear me. It's fine. I'm not competing for space or whatever. So input is up here, and then giant list. The 2 lists here are stereo and mono, and what this means is that these will come pre-packaged together to be panned left and right. So if you have like a stereo pair of mics and you have set up in a particular configuration, you can set them to be like 1 and 2, 3 and 4 kind of deal. If I could set this to be like 2 and 2, then I would have just recorded the overheads as a stereo pair. But I just route them stereo. I pan them left and right, and then bus them into something so that it's together. So it's really just a matter of where your workflow lies. So here's all your monos. The top bunch are the master, and the bottom bunch are the slave, because the way the PreSonus daisy chaining works is that each unit has 2 FireWire ports. One is an output that goes to a computer, and one is the input that takes the output of a secondary or a tertiary PreSonus Fire Studio thing. There's more than just a project that will work in this configuration, but you will have a maximum of 3 total. That's all you can do. Yeah. So here's your list, and then I have set. This one used to be the input, but I'm using 1 as my voice input, so it's not what's going on right now. So 1 would be here, and then also 1 here, and I have set these all the way up to 10. And you see that as I'm doing this, you can see they're actually bussed to go elsewhere. And this is because when you record them, it will record the audio, put it in the playlist, and then send them to the track that you suggest for it. And if you don't, it'll just send it to the master, I think. Either that or the one that it's recorded in. I'm pretty sure it'll send it to the master, but I have it set. It's setting it basically to its own mixing channel, so I don't have to do it manually. It's very nice. Other cool things you can do include setting a data folder. So you can either set, if you right click these, you can tell it where you want it to save the recorded file. By default, it will send it here. I think these are all previous recordings I've done. Or if you go into options and go to find the project settings, in general, you can set your own data folder, and it will do that automatically, provided you don't set the path before you make the folder setting. So if you set it, then all of these will be set to go to that data folder. But if you, like, for example, if you did some tests before you decided to set the folder, then these will be what you set and not the folder setting. So then you have to go and right click these and send them to your folder, which I do all the time, because I do exactly as I just said, is I fiddle around first, and then when I like what I'm doing, then I save it, and then then I have to make a new data folder, because I don't want everything. I don't want to have a Slice Beats folder that just has a billion samples. These are all resampling samples, because again, if you do this data folder setup and you are in Edison and you do the drag thing like you do when you're doing Harmor resampling, for example, it creates a new file every single time, and by default it'll be drag sample whatever, and then it'll go in here. And if you set a data folder, then it'll restart and be drag sample whatever. But if you name it something and then you drag it, it'll be whatever it's called within that number if you drag more than one. So these are all cool organizational things that I really should do that I clearly don't. But I'm telling you that you can, because sometimes people get the wrong idea about FL when they watch me use it because of stuff like that. So then, okay, now once you have that set up, you arm them. This is how you arm the inserts for recording. So now right now 1 through 10 are going to record. Now with one of these selected, any of the ones that you're going to record selected with actual intent, you can go up here and click on record, and then this window will show up. And you click on audio into the playlist as audio clip, and that's just a traditional. You hit record, and then the audio will show up in the freaking arrange window like you would any other recording program. You can do that by that, or you can right click it and get the same sort of action. Just go to hit audio, and then bam, there it is. So in case you click on this and you don't want that to show up anymore. But I like that, just to make sure things are doing what they're doing. And you also may have noticed that it's not actually recording when I hit the record button, and that's because it won't record until I hit play. And then when I hit play, it'll start to scroll, but audio won't show up visually. So it's not a bug when this starts to happen. When you hit stop and it actually stops recording, that's when your audio will show up. So don't worry about that. So then it's there, and then it's all going to be automatically sent to wherever mixer channel that you send it, like so. And I do my recording and mixing in the same project, But then of course, these are all located in a data folder that you send, so then you can have easy access to your files as well. It should be noted that recording in this fashion will automatically generate 32-bit WAV files. So go to this recording here. You have various options to change that sort of thing. You have basically 32-bit or not 32-bit. Now, I'm not sure because I've just always had it on 32-bit, but I'm pretty sure if you have that off, it will be whatever your drivers are set to, which for me is 24-bit. And if it is set to 32-bit, it doesn't necessarily mean that your drivers are recording it at 32-bit. It just means that your 24-bit file is going to be put inside a 32-bit file, which just has different meanings for headroom and noise floor, which will really not mean anything for your recording. It won't change your data at all. And whatever you record is certainly not going to, go beyond the 24-bit dynamic range anyway. It's also worth noting that 32-bit WAV files don't necessarily work on all Mac programs, or even all Windows programs for that matter. 24-bit WAV files totally will, and I think 32-bit AIFFs or whatever also will, but that's not something you can render in through FL. So this is important when you're doing a recording in FL and then you want to send a recorded file to someone else. Chances are the 32-bit WAV file ain't going to cut it unless they're also an FL user or a user of another PC-based recording software. Like, I'm pretty sure Pro Tools can handle it, but I happen to know that Logic cannot on a Mac. I've had that problem. I'm dying. I'm not dying. I'm fine. Yeah, so let's get into actual mixing. So then we have our files. You put them in the place that they're going. I have it routed so it's kick snare. The snare is sidechaining the overheads. Overhead 1 and 2 are panned and they're bussed into a thingy. I could do that, or I could put both channels into a single thing and then actually pan the individual recordings. But it's just easier so that I don't have to do that every time I want to do a new session. I can just have the session already be panned and good and set to go with the mix, which is another benefit to this sort of thing. It also means that when they are recording, your monitoring is going to be sent through the mix, so you'll hear what it sounds like pretty much immediately. And that works well for me because I have very well soundproof studio rooms. What else? Okay, so I start off usually by mixing the kick. Where's a good place? Right here. Actually, okay, yeah. An area where the hat is preferable because the hi-hat, will soon be your biggest enemy. So in the previous video, we saw that I had the microphone just inside the porthole of the kick drum, which was on the lower right-hand side of it, and the microphone was pointed at the center. Now, typically, this would get you lots of bleed, but we're not doing it. We're not having lots of bleed because I have set up a little blanketed apparatus, which is preventing bleed from approaching the mic from that position. It's also far enough away from the front head that the only bleed that we're getting is the snare because it's fucking loud. But we can also see the hi-hat is not really a big issue. So we can pump up the high frequencies as much as we want to, which we really do because this is a metal band. And that means that the kick is going to be all kinds of sharp and punchy and needs to be just murder. So, what does it sound like by itself? That. Let's look at the spectrum for a second. So that was an old thing. Let's make a new one. All right. This is me making sure my Edison is recording properly. All right. So you may be fooled into thinking that this is the fundamental note of the kick drum. It's not. It's this. That right there. So that's what we want to accentuate. Again, as I mentioned, it's a metal kick drum, so we want to have lots of high frequencies. But I don't want a lot of this sort of ringy wood sound going on. So just... Now that's very quick and dirty right there. I mean, I can pump up. That's super quick and dirty kind of deal. As you saw in the other EQ, it's more or less what I was doing. This guy. But this isn't very loud. And so then I bring it up into the Maximus to make it louder. I've done this by using the multiband to separate the important, the anatomy of the kick drum that we have in here. The anatomy is the fundamental, the mid frequencies, and the click. The click is just, you can very plainly see where it's sectioned off in the analysis, as well as the fundamental kind of deal, which is very nice. So I just sectioned that off and then compressed it so that it's all very well and good. Not a lot of compression because I don't actually want to increase the transient time of the thing altogether. I don't want the bass drum to actually ring out. I just want its punch to be very punchy. That's what's going on there. The snare drum is typically where you'll find the most damage done by the hi-hat. So here's what it sounds like normally. Now, again, what we want to do is you want to bring out the fundamental tone of the snare. Now, it's kind of hard to see right now just because the kick drum and the snare drum's fundamental, I mean, that's not where the kick's fundamental is, but it's so close to the harmonic of the kick drum is showing up in the fundamental area of the snare. So what I've done here is I've cut it just shy of where the snare is. Now, as I again mentioned in the previous video, mic positioning of a snare drum is again just a constant fight between getting the right angle on the snare and then also getting the right angle away from the hi-hat. There's many ways to get around this, but sometimes there aren't, and sometimes you run into them and you just are full force having a hi-hat in your snare drum. Now, the way you deal with that is not to just kill the snare, although sometimes what you'll do is you'll have a snare mic on the top and a snare mic on the bottom, and the bottom is going to capture so much high frequency action. Like, that's really all it's going to get. In fact, you don't even want any of the mid or the lows because you get this awful kind of slap on just the those snares, the actual physical snares, that does not sound good to me. Like, I don't like it. I don't like that sound. And so what I will do in a pinch is I will mic that up, and then I will just have only high frequencies going on in there. So then I can focus on cutting out the hi-hat from the top snare, because the hi-hat's not really going to be in the bottom. But this is manageable enough that I can, and then also as well, the snare itself is very high frequency because of the head he was using. He was using an Evans, I think it's called an HD Genera Dry. And its point is that it has holes around the ring of it, as opposed to like a control ring or even just like a flat head. It has holes. And what that does is it takes away a lot of the harmonic tone of a snare drum and basically just leaves a very sort of wet, slappy, papery sound, which can sometimes be terrible. But for close miking purposes, it's kind of a dream. It's kind of wonderful. Because there's just a huge amount of high frequencies going on, but there's not a lot of harmonic high frequencies going on. It's just transients. And it makes it really easy to mix because you can tell, like, there's just kind of like that sort of out of tune ring going on. And typically I'd want to mix that out, but it's not high. It's not really very loud or high frequency enough for it to really bother me or bother my ear in such a way. But to me, it just sounds natural. It sounds like a snare drum, which is great. So we have the fundamentals bumped up, and it might sound kind of weak to you or sort of focused, like too focused. And it's supposed to because that's the close mic, and that's the mic by itself. If we bring up the overheads and even the rest of the tom mics, it's pretty good. Even though I am sidechaining the overheads with the snare as such. I'm doing that because I want to preserve the force that the fundamental tone has in the snare. And I want a lot of the mid-high frequencies of the stereo aspect of the overheads taking over. But I want some of them, so I didn't, sidechain it completely out. So that's what that is. The snare is I just cranked up the volume. I didn't really do any compression on it. I didn't really need to. Now, overheads are easy. As I said before, I have them pan left and right. Which one is which, you just remember, or just typically you want the hats to be on the left and the right on the right. So in the EQ, I just have the lows kind of made it out a little bit, and I have the this sort of area between 2K and 6K kind of down a little bit, and that's because this is where the impact transients frequencies come into play from the kick drum and the snare, and so I pumped those up in the kick drum and the snare, but in doing so, I'm also pumping up the bleed that's into those instruments. That's the hi-hats and the crashes or whatever that are going in there. So in order to compensate for this, I'm cutting it out of the overheads. So this means that instead of sounding like this, it sounds like this, and over in total. And then I cut up the super highs to be up a little bit higher because the overheads are the only ones that are going to pick up those kinds of sounds. Being condenser microphones, they're also the only ones that pretty much even can. So use those to their strengths in doing so. Now, that's pretty much it for that. Now, the real fun gets to be when mixing toms. Toms, often I see them as really just being 2 or 3 more or 6 more microphones for the hi-hat. That's kind of just what drum miking is all about. It's damage control with the hi-hat. However, this worked out pretty not so much perfectly. I mean, I have never done a perfect drum recording, but it's worked out way better than it has in the past, which is part of the reason why we've been doing this video, is because I'm okay with demonstrating this as being a decent standard for drum recording. So let's talk about that. So before we even talk about that, we gotta bring up something about the fact that I did top and bottom mic recordings. So now we zoomed in really far here, and I have my PPQ, which is points per quarter, pulses per quarter, takes per quarter. I have that all the way up to 960, which is not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 96, which is 1/10 of the zoom distance. Adding additional PPQ increases your CPU usage, which for me is not such a huge deal, but it might be for you, so it's important that you realize that, and allows you to zoom in way farther. This is important because I really want to get in close and see what my phase alignment is and correct it when necessary, which is pretty much all the fucking time, because this is what top and bottom recordings are like originally. This would be the same thing if you did top and bottom stereo mic, as we talked about before. So we have here phase cancellation. This is pretty much what's happening, but you can see differences in the waveform. There's different frequencies in each of these mics, which means some frequencies are going to survive, but what's not going to survive is the fundamental tone. There's going to be a little bit difference just because the top and bottom heads of toms are so rarely tuned perfectly, but like enough of each of them are going to end up in both mics that phase cancellation is a very real problem that you'll have if you don't change the phase. So there's 2 ways you can do this in FL. You can either go into the actual sample and say reverse polarity, but when you do that, it brings it in out of keep on disk mode, and you actually have to load it into RAM. So if you didn't want to do that, you can go into the mixer and come up here. You have a reverse polarity option in just the mixer, and so that will keep the phase different. So, but I'll do it in the sample just because that's what I have done here. Not only do I want to do that, but I also want to do it in the sample because I can also physically see the phase, which is important. Speaking of phase, it's also worth noting that at the onset of recording, this is not going to happen. And you might wonder why, or you might go, duh. And both of those are because microphones are not the same distance from every source. which means things like I have it mapped up to the snare drum, basically, is what I did. And what this means is that the snare's close mic is 4 inches away from the point of impact, and the overheads are 4 feet away from the point of impact. So by default, this is your phase difference. That's almost 20 entire that's almost 30 milliseconds right there. That's 24 milliseconds difference of delay right there, which doesn't sound like a lot, or maybe it does sound like a lot, but typically that's enough to notice. You will hear a kind of a clunky delay with that sort of thing. So I line that up. I also line up. I mean, this is the snare bleeding into all the other microphones right here, so it's really easy to match up phase like that when you can tell. And then of course I also lined up the tom mic's phase because they aren't really. Because again, the top mic is right on the head, which is where the stick is hitting, and the bottom mic is on the bottom head, which is not where it is. It's like half a foot, or like 8 inches away, or 10 inches, depending on your instrument. So that's what that is. And so now we have all of our phases lined up. We can actually start mixing them. All right, let's mix the top tom. That's this guy. So without mixing, got that. Now this tom was tuned okay. I mean, I did the tuning, and it was okay. And it also had a kind of head on it that has some sort of resonance control rings on it. They're very light, but they do the job to the point where the ringing isn't really as sustained as it could be. Not only that, but I mean, despite that, there's still clear heads, which means that you get a lot of resonance. And what you hear here is a lot of ringing whenever the snare happens. Now, the first tom is typically the smallest one, and it's also the one that's closest to the snare. And this means, and it's the highest, which also means it's the closest to the snare in terms of tuning, not just in position. So that means that whenever the snare hits, you're going to get ringing in this particular tom. And also, not only that, but when you hit the tom, you're going to get ringing in the snare, which is why typically when you hear toms, you also hear the snares rattling. It's because of that. That's because of that thing. And you can also solve this problem by tuning the snare and the toms far enough away from each other that this doesn't happen. So by default, this is what we got going on in terms of the analysis. So what we're seeing here, actually, probably. You can see quite clearly what shows up when the snare hits. Right there, that. So I mean, that's the first thing I got rid of. It's still kind of there because I wanted just a bit of it in there. Because it is still part. It's still part of the harmonic structure of the tom, so that it's noticeable when it's totally gone. But of course, sometimes you need to get rid of it. Sometimes it's so bad that you need to get rid of it, and that's the point of doing the bottom mic. Is that certain consequences of boosting or cutting frequencies from either microphone, the top or the bottom, sometimes aren't present in the other one. In this particular instance, I was able to do more or less the same EQ mixing on both of the mics for more or less all of them, except for a few instances with the lower ones where I had to do very sharp cuts to deal with the ringing problem that there was with the kick drum. And as a result of this, we get pretty much the best result you can wish for doing a top and bottom mixing, which is you get high frequency definition on the top mic and the fundamental tone amplification out of the bottom mic, and you get a much beefier tone in total. That's the top mic, so it's not to begin with, not really beefy to begin with. Now, this guy was a good example of what I had to cut. But instead of it being the snare that was the problem, it was the kick drum. And then here you can see this huge, this huge cut I have right in the middle. Let's turn you guys on for a second. Yeah. And now that's really not so much to make the toms themselves sound better; it's to make it so that the ringing doesn't happen. That's why I started playing it here, where there's not much happening in the toms, but just in everything else. Now again, those are the close mics. You have to make sure you take everything into consideration with everything else together. And of course, this mix will be 100% different when, there's guitars and bass and stuff. But this is just sort of like the ideal of the drum mix that I'd want if I could make it sound like whatever I wanted to sound like. It's kind of what I like. Yeah, so like I said, we got lucky here in the sense that we could just, like, that's what it sounds like without any tom bleed. You can kind of still hear some bleed going on in there. So there's a way to deal with that without doing the more complicated EQ things that we did. I mean, we still want to do that because it still sounds better, but it's actually a trick that BT taught me. And this is to create a high pass filter in an EQ. Like, you go there by going to type high pass, because by default it's peaking. It's not peaking by default. It's low shelf, high shelf. Yeah, low shelf. You can even use a low shelf because then you could actually keep the low frequencies in there if you wanted them. You keep that, and then you basically turn it up to a high pass to like mid here for whenever there's not toms happening, and then you bring it back down when there is toms happening, because most of the toms, the important action is happening in the low end, and that's also where all the ringing is going to come from. That's where all the fundamental tones are. So that's where all the ringing is going to happen, and all the harmonic ringing as well. But up here is where all the up in the high frequencies, this is where the bleed happens the most. This is where the cymbals and the ride, which is typically right on top of the floor tom, so it's going to bleed all the time, the hi-hat, and even like the snare and kick. So that's where all this information is being kept. So that this is active all the time. This means that when we cut the fundamental bleed out of the picture, the overall image of the drum kit won't be changed as drastically. Because, like, that's a big difference right there, just cutting it like that. So that's one option, is the way to deal with that. Which, again, of course, is something that really only matters once we hear everything in context of the actual song. Because, I mean, it just does. It's kind of obvious. I believe I've covered everything that I wanted to talk about mixing in FL. I believe I did. I really hope I did, because it's the third time I've tried to record this video. If you have any questions, please ask me, and I will try to answer them. If not, there's not really an if not to that. Have a nice day. That's what I'm trying to say. If you haven't noticed, I'm kind of illin right now. I'm illin. Yeah. This is the second part to a two-part series. I'm still thinking it's called a series if it's just 2 parts, but I'm going to keep saying that because that's what I keep hearing people say, and so now I want to say it as well. But yes, all the relevant links are going to be in the description. Please look at that because they're cool. Again, questions, let me know and stuff. Yay. Have a good day.